In this video, I'm going to go over how to add fractions that have different denominators. All right, let's just go back to the basics. What if I said you've got 2 cats plus 5 dogs? Basically, you can't combine those and say you've got 7 cat dogs, etc. Well, it's the same thing if I said, well, what are 2 sevenths plus 5 eighths? They're just different things. They're different animals. I do not have a common denominator. It's like having 2 different animals. So what we need to do is find what's called a common denominator by making both of these equivalent fractions. So the question is, how can I write each of these fractions so that they have a common denominator? Well, that means we want to know what the smallest number, you could pick a bigger number, but you really like the smallest number that both 7 and 8 go into. All right? Now, if the two numbers have nothing in common, the least common, no factors in common, 7 and 8, and by the way, 7 and 8, since 7's prime, there's going to be no common factor for each of those except 1. So the common denominator is going to be 7 times 8, which is 56. So for this problem, the least common denominator is 56. If you want a review of least common denominator, look at my video on that. All right, so I'm going to make an equivalent fraction. How am I going to get 56 when I had a 7? I need to multiply this fraction by what? Well, 7 times what will give me 56? 8. So I need to multiply it by 8 over 8, right? That's the number 1. And I need to multiply the other fraction by what? 8 times what will give me 56? 7. So I need to rewrite 2 sevenths as 1656 because that's what 8 times 2 is. So 1656 is an equivalent fraction to 2 sevenths. And 5 eighths is an equivalent fraction to 3556. I got that by doing the 5 times 7 in the numerator. Now I've got a common denominator. So, thank goodness, I can add fractions now. 56 is the denominator, so you just write the denominator, and 16 plus 35 is 51. Now, the next thing is to see if this can be reduced. And to do that, you've got to think, well, are there any common factors? And if you're not sure, then go through the list or prime factor. By the way, 51, if you prime factor, is 3 times 17. Okay? I knew 3 went into it because the 5 and 1 add up to 6. And if you don't know that trick, go back to my divisibility test for 3. All right, so if it did cancel with something that of the 56, either 3 or 17 would have to go into 56. And 3 doesn't go into 56 because when you add the 5 and 6, you get 11. And 17 does not go into 56. So as it turns out, this is reduced. And that's the answer. Okay, let's do another problem. How about 3/4 plus 1/12? Okay, again, these are different animals. We've got fourths and twelfths. It's like you have a pie split up into 4 pieces. You have another pie split up into 12 pieces. The pieces are all different sizes. So 3/4 and 1/12. You got to look at the denominators and think, what's the number they both go into? Now, anytime one of the denominators is a factor of the other denominator, then the bigger denominator is the least common denominator. And note, 4 goes into 12. All right, so that's nice. We're going to have to make these both 12ths. And that means the second fraction, 1/12, you could leave alone. It's just going to still be 1/12. But what am I going to do with this 3/4? I need to make sure I multiply the top and bottom by the same number. Now, you could just extend your fraction bar if you want and put a little time sign and say, what are you going to multiply the top and bottom by? I need to multiply 4 times what to get 12? 3. So that gives me 9/12, right? 3/4 is equivalent to 9/12. And now I've got 9/12 plus 1/12. So I can go ahead and add. I've got a common denominator of 12. And then we could do the 9 plus 1. But now it's not reduced. There's a common factor of 2. So if I divide the top and bottom by 2, what does that equal? 5, 6. All right, the next problem is 3/8 plus 5/12. All right, again, these are different denominators. Think of it as a pie split up into 8 pieces and a different pie into 12 pieces. You know, the slices just aren't the same size. So that's the whole idea of getting a common denominator. So we need to get the same denominator. Now, I'm sure many students could do this in their head. What's the least common denominator of 8 and 12? But I'm going to do a little review of my little upside down division method here. You take both denominators, put them side by side. You kind of do this upside down division bar. And you think, what's a number that goes into both 8 and 12? And you want to pick the biggest number that you can think of. And 4 is that number. So 4 goes into 8 how many times? 2. So you divide, because you picked a number that it's going to divide into evenly, right? And 4 goes into 12 3 times. And then remember that the least common denominator is either 8 times 3 or 12 times 2. Remember, that's how we get the least common denominator, so it's 24. So I know the least common denominator is 24. This is what's really cool about using this method when you're just adding two fractions. 8 times 3. If you look kitty quarter from it, you'll see what you have to multiply the 8 times to get 24. Now, it's easy to do that in your head, of course, anyway, but for larger numbers, you're going to see how convenient this is. So I'm going to have to multiply this fraction by 3 over 3, so my new numerator is 9. 9/24 is equivalent to 3/8. And for 5/12, 12 times what is 24? Well, if you don't feel like thinking very hard, just look over here. It tells you whatever's kitty corner from it, 12 times 2. So that's 10. And now I've got the same denominator. So you just write the denominator down and add the numerators. And then make sure it's reduced. 19/24 is reduced, and we're done. You can also add by putting your fractions up and down. And this is helpful when you have to get a common denominator anyway, because you know you're going to have to multiply the top and bottom by something to make equivalent fractions. So I know I'm going to multiply each of these times something. And I'm going to go over on the side. We're trying to find a number that both 9 and 15 go into. And I'm going to do my little upside down method. And I show this in one of my least common multiple videos. Because the least common denominator is the least common multiple of the denominators. The denominators are 9 and 12, so the least common multiple of 9 and 15 is what we need. So, what goes into 9 and 15? 3. 3 goes into 9 3 times. 3 goes into 15 5 times. And so, what's our least common denominator? Well, whatever's easiest to do in your head. How about 9 times 5? That's going to be 45. So you know the least common denominator is going to be 45. And you know it's 9 times 5, so you know to do the 9 times 5, and you know 15 you're going to multiply by 3. So what do I get? On the top, 4 times 5 is 20, and 2 times 3 is 6. So now I'm going to add those fractions together. So I have the same denominator, so it's going to be 45ths, and 20 plus 6 is 26. Now we have to make sure that's reduced. So you think, is there any number that goes into 26 and 45? Well, 2 doesn't go into both numbers. 3 doesn't go into both numbers. 5 doesn't go into both numbers. And that's it. That's all you have to really check. So this is reduced. All right. So it takes a while adding fractions that have different denominators, especially if there's more than 2 fractions to deal with. But I'm going to do some more on the next video. So this is part 1.